why do so much work? I mean, having some understanding based on our conversation, also just watching the show, you realize how much work it is to put something like that together. Why do it?
I wanted to do it for a number of reasons. One is that I've always felt that even that there are trends in journalism, and that certain things become demonized, and then everyone talks about how terrible they are, and then the public decides that that's truly the case. So, right now, no one could write an article about opioids being good. You simply couldn't do that. It wouldn't be allowed. You'd be violently attacked. But you can easily write an article about how psilocybin is good, and you will be congratulated for doing that. And I started thinking about what things can and can't be talked about, and what can I talk about that no one else is going to talk about. And the main thing that I was interested in with the show is clandestine drug synthesis. That's sort of the thing that I feel is most widely misrepresented in the media, are the people that run underground drug labs. So somebody at Johns Hopkins, if they're doing research with psilocybin, we're very eager to congratulate them for their work. But someone who's actually responsible for providing these drugs to the public so that normal people can use them, we're eager to demonize them, even though they're risking their freedom to do that. And they're typically not bad people. And in many cases, they're very good, idealistically motivated people that do this because they think it's the right thing to do with their lives. They really believe in it. So I thought, okay, with my understanding of chemistry, this would be a great opportunity to clear up a lot of the misconceptions regarding clandestine drug synthesis. That was kind of the most important thing for me to do. But then beyond that, I wanted to tell drug stories that hadn't been told, and to present a basic case for understanding the value of these things. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can say that, look, this is valued by an indigenous group, and they've integrated this into their traditions and into their spirituality, and they really appreciate it. So maybe think twice before making it illegal, because these people are not only not experiencing problems with it, it's making their lives better. So think very carefully before making a plant illegal. That's one basic idea that I wanted to communicate. But then the other is, these are real scientific tools. I've been on both sides of this discussion journalistically. I've had the opportunity to interview enormous numbers of people and to be interviewed many, many times. And from being on the opposite side, from being interviewed and profiled by people, I've become aware of how stupid a lot of these discussions are, and how easy it is for people to minimize and reduce the importance of all of this. It's just drugs. It's everything. It's your consciousness, all of medicine, medicinal chemistry, pharmacology. This is not a niche subject of study. This is one of the most important areas known to mankind, and has been for thousands of years, are medicines. So just to get people, at the very least, even if they don't like it, to acknowledge its value and to take it a little bit seriously, and not just say, oh, drugs, just that stuff that druggies use. It's so much more than that.
So I've recommended this. I've recommended, let's see, a few different pronunciations, but Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. Don't worry about the spelling. Just search Hamilton on your favorite provider, and you'll find the show. I watched it on Amazon Prime. You can watch it anywhere, or many, many, many different places. Which episode might you suggest? And I'm going to give you a few different profiles. A scientist start with. And I know that's really broad, but let's just say somebody who would consider themselves, or who is professionally a scientist.
It depends on there's an episode from this most recent season called A Clandestine Chemist's Tale. And that's about how the war on drugs has made it more difficult for people to have home labs, partially. That's one of the ideas that I was trying to communicate. It's also about clandestine MDMA synthesis, and features the first ever televised total synthesis of MDMA. And it's real. It's, that's what you see is a real synthesis of MDMA. So just the amazingness of even capturing that on film is something that I think is cool for almost anyone who really wants to see, this is where it comes from, this is how it's done. You know, it goes, we start with, not we, I didn't, but the chemist starts with, you know, crude sassafras root bark oil and takes it all the way down to the recrystallized MDMA hydrochloride over the course of 5 days. And I was just kind of blown away by watching that process. And I also televised a total synthesis of Quaalude. And also we did a little bit of a drug called gaboxidol, got a little bit into LSD chemistry. I mean, there's a lot of chemistry. I would say that, drugs aside, there's probably more hardcore chemistry in this TV show than there has ever been in any TV show ever. If anyone can find...
I would be astonished if that's not the case.
Which is cool. I mean, yeah. I think it's great because people find it interesting, and I get so many emails from people saying that they find chemistry interesting for the first time. And the way to do it wasn't to simplify it. It was to show people how complicated it is.
Well, it's not only not dumbed down, but I love that routinely in these episodes, and I'd like to think of myself as a reasonably well-read guy, but I haven't taken much chemistry, and you'll go through a number of different diagrams, or they'll have certain words will come up, and there is no pause for a 10-minute explanation of the term. It's provided in context, but it is sophisticated. It's a sophisticated show, but still very entertaining to watch. For someone who is a non-scientist, let's just say they're fascinated by what they have read about psychedelics or heard about psychedelics. They've never taken a psychedelic. They find it terrifying on some level, the prospect. Is there an episode or a set of episodes you'd recommend?
Well, I'm probably the worst person to ask, because the things that I like in my own work are always the things that are the most obscure that no one has ever done, but that's from my own perspective. Whereas I think the mushroom episode that I did was the most successful of them all. So that's probably, I guess that's the people speaking. They like that one the most. That wouldn't be the first one I would recommend, but people want to learn about mushrooms.
What would be the first one you would recommend?
Probably A Clandestine Chemist's Tale, or The Lazy Lizard School of Hedonism episode about this chemist who operated an MDMA lab in the center of a volcano.
So you mentioned, which is a fantastic episode, you mentioned the mushrooms. What have the other most popular episodes been?
I think people like the episodes that detail shamanism. I think people are very interested in shamanism, partially because it's non-technical, but because it's such a foreign idea that you could have a spiritual tradition based around drug consumption, and that it's so non-taboo that people do it with their families and they do it to heal, and they've just never seen anything like that before. And I hadn't either until I saw it myself.
What episodes would fall into that category? The
mushroom episode, the salvia episode from season 1, both have that. And the San Pedro episode from season 2 is a pretty in-depth analysis with actually no voiceover, though. It had a different format from the other episodes, but it's a view of Cactus shamanism in Peru that I think gives you an appreciation for the medical context in the community, that this really is, this is so different from what you would think of when you would hear this guy gives people mescaline every night. These are people that are treating him exactly the same way you would treat a doctor in the United States. Just, I have epilepsy. I have a sprained ankle.
I mean, I don't know what he would call himself, huachumero or curandero, but I mean, probably not shaman. Maybe he does, but I'm not sure how he would self-describe from that episode. What would he call himself, do you think?
He may have called himself a shaman.
Oh, he did?
He may have. I would have to double check.
Maybe in English, yeah. I mean, a lot of those guys would say curandero or huachumero, something like that.
Yeah.
This is not going to be relevant to anyone else, but since I'm curious, did you actually have like toilet shit or chicken shit splashed on your face in that episode? Because there was a shot while you were doing your chores where something awful, and it was edited in to your cleaning montage, got splashed on your glasses, and it looked awful. I don't know if that was done in the effects studio.
Okay, you caught me. I couldn't resist that gag.
Okay, all right.
I just couldn't resist it. I have a sort
of very fast. It's very fast.
Yeah, I have a slightly childish sense of humor, and yeah, it was just you had to.
That was good. Yeah, got me. It stuck in my mind.
In there.
That episode also features, I think, perhaps my favorite wardrobe of yours, which is otherwise fairly constant, but the gigantic yellow, like big bird hat.
Yes,
that you're dressed in towards the end. I don't want to give away too much. You didn't look too happy to be doing. I guess I imagine I haven't encountered this directly in the San Pedro or Huachuma Cactus tradition, but the sopladas where he was having you take in the like Florida water or whatever that was into your mouth to spritz on him. You did not look happy to be doing that.
It's so terrible. Have you done that before?
I have. Yeah, you don't want to. Certainly don't want to drink it.
You don't want to hold it in your mouth.
Yeah.
It's probably 95% ethanol.
Yeah.
And I lost the ability to taste for several days after doing that. It was actually maybe one of the most damaging things I did in the entire show, was holding the Florida water in my mouth. Agua Florida.
Agua de Florida, yeah. What was one of the... for people who maybe... So we talked about people who are nervous or apprehensive yet curious. What about the overly confident, cocksure person who might go into something without a healthy level of respect? Is there an episode you'd recommend? The DMT episode, the opener for that episode, I think does a pretty decent job.
The 5-MeO DMT.
The 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah. It's hard to say because that's a great example. And I've seen that outside of my film work. I've seen someone who had a very cocky attitude approach 5-MeO DMT is like, I've done a 10-strip, dude. I've done...
10-strip meaning LSD?
Yeah, mm-hmm. I've done whatever. There's nothing that can...
I'm a veteran psychonaut. Yeah. Bring it on.
And then, it's a bad attitude. You don't want to enter any experience with that attitude because what good could possibly come of that? So it's good to take things seriously. You don't want to be afraid, but it's a serious experience. I mean, I would say it's no less serious than being reborn. So if you want to be reborn with a angry, cocky, confrontational attitude, then go for it. But it's probably not the best approach. But, that's the other thing is I've had to cultivate a really laissez-faire attitude toward a lot of things to do my show effectively. If you're going to be a journalist and you're going to interview people, you can't constantly be telling them what's right and what's wrong.
Yep.
And there's a lot of moralism and there's a lot of psychedelic prescriptivism in the community. People love to say, you're doing it wrong. You're not serious enough. You're just trying to get high. It's not respectful. It's not traditional. It's abuse. And I really hate to see that. I think that's one of the worst things that somebody can do because ultimately, if you do that, you're just aping the government's same mistakes of setting up these rules of right and wrong ways to use drugs. So you can use Marinol if it's prescribed by a doctor and it's synthetic THC, but you can't use it from a plant. That's the wrong way. All this, you don't want to go down that road of telling people what's right and what's wrong, assuming they're not hurting other people. So I try not to tell people what is right and what is wrong. So if people want to smoke 5-MeO DMT with a cocky attitude, be my guest. But it's really anything that I say. It's just in an effort to minimize any harm that could come from these substances, because it is a very serious experience and it could be difficult.
What was the scariest, if you had any scariest experience or unsettling experience that you had? Not necessarily, I mean, they're given the places that you were going to. I can think of a few scenarios offhand. I mean, with kratom, also safety. I mean, my God, there's so many ways that you could put yourself into difficult situations that are unrelated to the psychedelic the consumption of psychedelics themselves. But were there any experiences you had that were particularly difficult?
I had one interesting experience many years ago where I've been to China for undercover reporting 3 times. And the first time I did it, it was maybe 2012, something like that. And I was going undercover to a lab that was producing a synthetic cannabinoid called UR144, which has a cool structure. And I went to the lab, interviewed the chemists, and they gave me a sample of the UR144. So then I was back at my hotel room with my cameraman, who has Crohn's disease and loves to be stoned. He's stoned all the time. And it helps him with Crohn's, but also he just loves to be stoned. And so he was saying, should we try out this UR144, this synthetic cannabinoid? And I thought, well, yeah, I suppose we should maybe give it a little try. But I didn't have a scale. And typically I would never use a drug without a scale. But I thought, okay, this has been used by people before. There's a little bit of information on it. I'll take 1 grain of this granular crystal and I'll smoke it. So I smoked a grain and he smoked a grain, and we were both sitting in our hotel room and starting to get very, very high. And as I got more and more high, I started experiencing this fractal of uncertainty where I was thinking, I don't know if this is UR144. But then I was thinking, well, even if it is UR144, I don't know anything about UR144. I don't know if it has toxic metabolites. I don't know if it is carcinogenic. I don't know if it has any form of toxicity. But even if it didn't have those things, I don't know if this is pure UR144. And if it isn't pure, I don't know anything about the toxicity of those impurities. But even if it is pure and doesn't have toxic impurities, I don't know the dose that I consumed. I could have maybe consumed an overdose. And, just going on and on and on, all the branching uncertainty about safety and purity and potency and dose. And I was fine, actually, and actually ended up having a good experience. But it just made me think, you don't want to go down the fractal of uncertainty road. You want to minimize the uncertainty as much as you can, because your own mind is already infinitely uncertain. So why not at least know that you've consumed UR144 and know that you've consumed 1 milligram, so you can at least rest on that foundation. So the negative experiences that I've had have almost always been a product of uncertainty and inadequate preparation. I would say that the negative experiences that I have had after carefully measuring doses have typically been okay, because I did have that ability to fall back on. I took 1.4 milligrams. Previously, I'd taken 1. This is not going to be that much stronger. I'm going to be okay. It was over 4 hours last time. It's going to be over 4 hours this time.
And you also have the ability and the training to assess or improve purity yourself. Right?
That's true. That is true. Yeah. So minimizing uncertainty, I think, is really important. But then some of these things are more challenging, and 5-MeO-DMT is an example of that. It has an ability to really frighten people. There's some people that only have these negative experiences. And when I was using it most recently, there's a chemist, Casey Hardison, who's a friend of mine, and he had gone out drinking with a friend of his, And after drinking a little bit, they decided to smoke 5-MeO DMT together. And they both smoked it at the same time, which is something that you shouldn't do. You want somebody watching over you. And they both dissociated because it has a sort of dissociative character. And when my friend Casey came back, his friend was dead. He had asphyxiated on his vomit while he was in this state, and there was no one watching him.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So that's a pretty frightening thing to have happened. And then I was filming this piece about it, and I remember talking to this gynecologist turned toad venom shaman, and I was saying, I really have some reservations about this, to be honest with you, because this friend of a friend very recently died, and the fact that happened it's frightening to me. And he was saying, oh yes, how it was so terrible, just terrible, and no one ever would have expected it to happen to him because of course he was the son of a shaman. And I was saying, oh, I didn't realize he was the son of a shaman. That's interesting. And he was saying, oh, you're talking about the recent death in Brazil? And I was saying, no, this is the recent death in Colorado. There are multiple recent deaths. And, so just the fact that it's even implicated in these deaths, even though it's not a direct effect, a direct toxic effect, it's always people drowning while they're dissociated or asphyxiating on their vomit. But just the fact that this had happened at all was enough to really give me some concerns about doing it.
So you mentioned drowning. So I have to ask because I wanted to save it for this conversation. It's part of the reason that the 5-MeO episode opener is so attention grabbing. Why on earth did the, I suppose, shaman / facilitator choose a location with so much water and so many rocks?
I have gotten so much criticism for featuring that. And that's an interesting thing about making these documentaries, is that there's a question of showing things the way they are, even if the way they are is potentially unsafe, or trying to always set an example for other people. Because I don't want to misrepresent reality and say things are a way that they're not. But at the same time, that experience showed me that you want to maybe set an example. I certainly got a lot of criticism for it. His reason for doing his sessions by the water is, I think, simply that it was a beautiful location, and the people that were smoking the venom were very experienced, so he thought that they could handle it. But clearly there's a risk of drowning, and clearly you could hurt yourself on a sharp rock or something like that.
I want to revisit something we chatted about a little bit last night, because I had asked you, and feel free to correct my recollection here, why you hadn't produced an episode with ayahuasca. And I don't remember this train of conversation in the truth barrel in the sauna, but I found what you said very thought-provoking, and I wanted to explore it here. I don't know if you recall where we picked up, but it was related to shamanism and the providing of explanation, I believe it was, or something along those lines. And the mention of uncertainty earlier helped me to recall that portion of the conversation. But why not feature ayahuasca?
Well, there's a number. We can get back to that. I actually tried. I tried to do a story about the death of Kyle Nolan. I don't know if you know that story. Because one of my concerns, again, with dogma and with prescriptivism is that people start to say that there is only one way to do things. So when ayahuasca was at the height of its popularity, in New York at least, if you said to someone, I've done ayahuasca, the next question they would ask you is, did you do it in the Amazon? And if the answer is no, then you didn't really do ayahuasca, did you? You just did some perversion of ayahuasca that shouldn't be called ayahuasca. And I found that very obnoxious and elitist and stupid, because ayahuasca is a tea, and it's a tea that anyone listening to this can make. Not that they should, but they can, assuming that you can boil plants in water. And it's not a special knowledge to make it. So the idea that you have to go to a foreign country and be with a different culture to experience it, I think is flawed, especially because a tourist industry has emerged to satisfy this enormous demand of white outsiders in the Amazon. I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with drug tourism, but if the whole point of going there is to have a traditional experience, and then what you're actually having isn't traditional in the slightest, then what was the point of traveling in the first place? So one thing that happened is you had all these white outsiders. There isn't all that much anthropological literature on the subject, and they probably weren't reading it to begin with. So they don't know what is traditional to begin with. So someone comes to a retreat, in this case it was a retreat called Shimbre, and the shaman says, I'm actually a Martian. I'm
always a promising start.
Is it?
But
this is a question. Yeah. So you're a white outsider,
yeah,
and somebody says, I'm a Martian.
Yeah.
You don't want to appear racist.
Right.
This could be their tradition. You don't know what their tradition is.
Right.
Maybe they come from a long line of Martians, and it would be very offensive to question their Martian heritage.
Right.
You don't know.
True.
So no one wants to say anything. So people are getting away with saying absolutely ridiculous things about themselves, just neglecting their duties, forget spiritual duties, just their duties as basically babysitters. They're not watching people. And there was a teenager named Kyle Nolan who went to Peru to have one of these sorts of experiences with a shaman named Maestro Moncoluto, and he disappeared. His parents go to the retreat looking for him. The shaman says, oh, he just walked away. Then they find his body buried in a shallow grave on the outskirts of the retreat. So as soon as that hits the news, and that was actually international news, it was in tabloids.
I do remember when that happened.
Yeah. Then all these people come out of the woodwork and say, that Maestro Moncoluto, I always knew there was something up with him. I always knew there was something wrong. He would say that he would just sit and watch soap operas while everyone was on ayahuasca. He wasn't watching anyone. And something about that struck me as being very dangerous, that people cared more about what they perceived as being traditional than what was effective or what was safe. And if he had thought, you know what, this is a tea, and if I'm really interested in it, maybe I can brew a low-dose batch of it myself and test it out and figure this out on my own, I guarantee he was capable of it, and he would probably still be alive. So
what was the cause of death? Was it ever determined?
It was never determined, unfortunately. So I don't, and that's often the case with these. So it's really out of open-mindedness that I think that people should be aware that there's multiple ways to do these things, that it doesn't make your experience non-valid if it wasn't conducted in South America. But the other reason that you were initially getting at is that, you know, the mystery of existence or the mystery of life is sort of the grand mystery that we all must figure out for ourselves. And it's so difficult and painful to think about your own mortality and the death of the people that you love and what the purpose of life is, that religions emerged to help people deal with these big existential questions. And they help a lot. I think that's one reason that religions are as popular as they are, because it's rough to sit alone in your apartment, scratching your head, wondering what the meaning of life is, or something like that. And so I understand why people want these interpretive conceptual frameworks for the psychedelic experience. And that's why from the get-go in the 1960s, it was, you know, Zen Buddhism or the Tibetan Book of the Dead or whatever. Any explanatory framework that could be found was jumped on, because the reality that there is no explanation is not all that palatable. But as unpalatable as it is, I think that is the value. Exactly what makes it difficult is what makes it valuable. And to have that experience, and I say this cautiously, but to have that experience by yourself with no one explaining anything to you, to be confronted by the full magnitude of the mystery with an absence of explanation, is one of the most powerful experiences that you can have. And I don't know if a shaman prevents you from having that experience. They might not, but I know that you will have it if there's no one there to tell you what's happening.
How have you found it, if you're comfortable